In the early 1900s, the Atlantic was the center of a technological race between two major shipping powers. The Cunard Line had already set a massive standard with ships like the Lusitania, using scale and speed to establish dominance over the ocean. To reclaim the lead, the White Star Line began a project of even greater scale. In a Belfast shipyard, thousands of laborers spent years assembling three massive vessels: the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. Titanic, at 882 feet long and weighing 46,000 tons, was the largest moving object humans had ever built. This scale allowed for a level of luxury previously unseen at sea. Titanic's interior featured a massive grand staircase under a glass dome, Turkish baths, and a swimming pool. These features attracted the wealthiest industrialists of the age, while the lower decks were filled with immigrants seeking a connection to the American dream. The project cost $7.5 million in 1912, over $200 million in today's currency. As the completed ship began its maiden voyage, the press focused on its 16 watertight compartments and double-bottom hull, labeling the vessel unsinkable. By the time Titanic left the docks, the prevailing belief among both engineers and the public was that the Atlantic had finally been tamed. The ship was no longer viewed as a simple transport vessel, but as proof that modern technology could effectively neutralize the risks of the sea. The safety systems on board were configured based on a specific set of priorities. Designers opted to carry only 20 lifeboats, a number that met the outdated 1894 regulations, but only provided enough seats for half of the passengers. This choice ensured the views from the upper decks remained clear and the promenade spaces uncluttered. On April 14th, 4 days into the voyage, Titanic was maintaining a speed of nearly 22 knots. Captain Edward Smith was pushing the engines toward their limit, aiming to maintain a fast schedule for the arrival in New York. Throughout the day, radio operators received multiple explicit warnings from other ships about ice fields and large icebergs directly in Titanic's path. These reports were documented, but the ship's speed and heading remained unchanged. This left a ship with limited life-saving capacity moving at high speed into a region of documented ice. At 11:40 p.m., the North Atlantic was unusually calm. Without waves breaking against the base of icebergs to create white foam, the lookouts had no visual indicators to help them spot obstacles in the dark until the ice was directly ahead of the bow. This diagram shows the physical limitations of the ship's momentum. At 22 knots, the 46,000-ton vessel had a turning radius too wide to avoid the ice. Even with engines reversed and the rudder turned hard to port, the ship could not clear the path. The iceberg struck the starboard side, scraping the hull beneath the waterline. While the impact was significant below, it felt like a minor vibration to the passengers on the upper decks. Many assumed the ship had merely brushed past a small piece of ice. In the first-class lounges, some passengers joked about the incident while drinking tea. They were unaware that beneath them, the freezing ocean was already filling the forward sections of the hull. This cross-section shows the 16 compartments that were the basis of the unsinkable claim. The theory was that if the hull were breached, these sections could be sealed off to keep the ship afloat. However, the dividing walls did not reach all the way to the ceiling. As water filled the front sections, the bow began to sink, and the ocean simply spilled over the top of one bulkhead into the next, like water filling an ice cube tray. When the engineers assessed the damage, they found 6 compartments were flooding. Titanic was designed to survive the flooding of 4. With 6 sections open to the sea, the ship's weight had passed the point where buoyancy was physically possible. At this moment, the ship's fate became a matter of simple physics. Regardless of the denial on the upper decks, the machine was mathematically certain to sink. As the realization of the danger spread, the shortage of lifeboats created immediate chaos. Because many passengers still believed the ship was safer than the small boats, and because the crew had never conducted a full emergency drill, the early lifeboats were launched with many seats empty. Individual choices defined the final hours. Isidore and Ida Strauss, owners of Macy's department store, were offered seats in a lifeboat. Ida refused, staying with her husband so they could face the end together. On the deck, Wallace Hartley and the ship's band continued to play music. Their performance lasted until the final minutes of the sinking, intended to keep the crowd calm as the lifeboats were lowered. None of the musicians survived. Below deck, the engineering crew stayed at their posts in the flooding compartments. They manually operated pumps and kept the generators running, which allowed the radio operators to continue sending distress signals and kept the lights on for the evacuation. As the mechanical systems of the ship failed, the survival of the 710 people who reached the lifeboats depended on the specific sacrifices of the crew and passengers who stayed behind. After the ship disappeared, hundreds of people were left in the freezing water, where most died of hypothermia within minutes. The survivors huddled in these boats for hours, waiting in the silence of the North Atlantic. The RMS Carpathia arrived just before dawn. The crew brought the survivors on board and began the journey to New York, carrying the first accounts of the disaster to a world that still believed the ship was safe. The disaster resulted in the first international convention for the safety of life at sea. New regulations mandated lifeboats for every person on board, required 24-hour radio watches on all ships, and established the International Ice Patrol to monitor the North Atlantic. Titanic remains a primary example of the risks inherent in prioritizing speed and aesthetics over safety. It serves as a reminder of the limits of technology, preserved by the accounts of those who reached the Carpathia and the records of those